Obinna Umeh had one hand on the gate of the mansion he had spent 40 years building when a single sentence stopped his heart. By this time next week, everyone will believe he died peacefully. The voice belonged to his own daughter. The second voice, cold and unshaken, belonged to the man Obinna had welcomed as a son. Together, they calmly discussed changing his will, hiding the evidence, and ensuring that no one would ever question the death of one of Nigeria's most respected billionaires. Standing alone in the darkness outside his own home, Obinna realized that the greatest enemy of his life had never been poverty or business rivals. It had been the family he loved most. What would you do if the people waiting to welcome you home were secretly waiting for you to die? Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. We'd love to know how far this story has traveled, and if you enjoy emotional stories filled with hope, justice, and unforgettable twists, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss our next journey. Long before people called him one of Nigeria's most respected billionaires, Obinna Umeh had been a barefoot boy who knew exactly what hunger felt like. He was born in a quiet village outside Enugu, where most families survived on farming and small trading. His father repaired bicycles beneath an old mango tree, while his mother sold roasted corn by the roadside. They never earned much, but they taught Obinna lessons that money could never buy. "Your name is worth more than your pocket," his father often said. "A poor man with honor sleeps better than a rich man with guilt." Obinna carried those words with him throughout his life. When he was 15, tragedy struck. His father died after a brief illness that the family could not afford to treat. Overnight, Obinna became the man of the house. Every morning before sunrise, he helped his mother in the fields, then walked several kilometers to school, often with an empty stomach. Many evenings he studied under a kerosene lamp until the fuel ran out. Teachers admired his determination, but admiration could not pay school fees. More than once, he was sent home because his tuition remained unpaid. Each time he returned the next day, after earning a little money loading trucks at the local market or carrying heavy sacks for traders. Those difficult years shaped him. Instead of becoming bitter, Obinna became disciplined. Instead of blaming the world, he searched for opportunities. When he was 21, he left Enugu with a small travel bag, less than 2,000 naira in his pocket, and a promise to his mother that he would someday return to build a better life for them both. Lagos overwhelmed him. The city never seemed to sleep. Cars filled the roads day and night. Street vendors shouted from every corner. Towers of glass rose beside crowded neighborhoods where thousands struggled to survive. For months, Obinna accepted any work he could find. He cleaned warehouses. He unloaded shipping containers. He worked as a security guard during the night and sold phone accessories during the day. There were nights when exhaustion nearly defeated him, but he refused to surrender. Slowly, his honesty began attracting people. A businessman noticed that Obinna always returned extra change. Another trusted him to supervise deliveries. Years later, that same businessman offered him a small partnership. It was the opportunity that changed everything. Obinna studied every aspect of import and distribution. He learned how to negotiate fairly, how to treat employees with respect, and how to build trust instead of fear. Unlike many competitors, he refused to pay bribes or cheat suppliers. Progress came slowly, but it came steadily. Within 15 years, the small trading company had grown into one of southeastern Nigeria's largest manufacturing and logistics businesses. People admired Obinna not only because he had become wealthy, but because he remained approachable. He visited factories without bodyguards. He remembered the names of cleaners and drivers. Every December, he quietly paid school fees for hundreds of children whose parents could not afford an education. Few people knew the number was much higher. To Obinna, wealth only had meaning if it changed someone else's future. His greatest joy, however, was never his company. It was his daughter. Adiz had been only 6 years old when her mother, Ifunanya, passed away after a sudden illness. The loss nearly destroyed Obinna. Friends encouraged him to remarry. Relatives insisted that a little girl needed another mother. Obinna politely refused every suggestion. He wanted no one to make Adiza feel unwanted inside her own home. Instead, he rearranged his entire life around raising her himself. Despite running a growing company, he never missed her school performances. He attended every parent meeting. He learned to braid her hair when she was young, even though his first attempts were so uneven that both of them laughed until tears rolled down their faces. Every birthday he baked her favorite chocolate cake himself, refusing to let professional chefs replace the tradition. When Adiza entered university, Obinna was convinced that every sacrifice had been worthwhile. She graduated with honors in business management and returned to join the family company. Employees praised her intelligence. Investors admired her confidence. Obinna proudly believed she would someday become an even greater leader than he had ever been. Then she introduced him to Emeka Okafor. Emeka appeared to be everything a father could hope for. He was well-educated, soft-spoken, respectful. He always greeted elderly staff members before speaking with executives. He often stayed late at the office, claiming he wanted to learn every aspect of the business before accepting greater responsibility. Obinna appreciated his humility. Over several years, he gradually trusted Emeka with increasingly important projects. Whenever someone questioned that trust, Obinna defended him. "Character cannot be bought," he would say. "I see sincerity in that young man." When Adiza and Emeka announced their engagement, Obinna spared no expense celebrating their marriage. The wedding united influential families from across Nigeria. Business leaders, community elders, clergy, and government officials attended. Yet, the happiest person in the room was not the bride. It was Obinna. Watching his daughter smile reminded him of every hardship he had endured decades earlier. For the first time since his wife's death, he truly believed his family was complete again. Years passed peacefully, or so he believed. As he approached his 70th birthday, Obinna began thinking less about expanding his empire and more about the legacy he wished to leave behind. He had accumulated more wealth than he had ever imagined possible. Money no longer motivated him. Purpose did. He quietly instructed his longtime lawyer, Barrister Chinedu Nwosu, to begin preparing a comprehensive succession plan. The company would continue operating under professional leadership. Large portions of his personal fortune would establish scholarships, hospitals, and programs supporting widows and orphaned children throughout Nigeria. His daughter would still inherit substantial wealth, but not absolute control over everything he had built. Obinna believed this was the fairest decision. He had seen too many fortunes destroy families. He wanted his legacy to bless generations rather than become a source of endless conflict. Only Barrister Chinedu knew the complete details. The official signing would take place after one final family gathering at Obinna's mansion the following week. Obinna smiled as he looked over the documents one last time. He imagined announcing his retirement surrounded by the people he loved most. He believed it would become one of the happiest evenings of his life. He had no idea that the same announcement would awaken a darkness hidden inside his own family. A darkness that had already begun waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The following Tuesday, Obinna Umeh finished his final meeting much earlier than expected. The board of directors had spent the entire afternoon discussing expansion into neighboring West African markets, but Obinna's thoughts were elsewhere. For weeks, he had been looking forward to spending a quiet evening at home with his daughter and son-in-law before the formal family gathering that would take place a few days later. As his driver steered the black SUV through the streets of Enugu, Obinna stared out the window, watching ordinary people hurry home after work. A woman balanced a basket of fruit on her head while holding her young son's hand. A group of mechanics laughed outside a roadside workshop. School children chased one another across a dusty field, their uniforms stained, but their smiles bright. Scenes like these always reminded him of where he had come from. No matter how much wealth he accumulated, he never wanted to forget the life that had shaped him. When the vehicle approached the gates of his mansion, Obinna surprised his driver. "You can go home early today," he said with a warm smile. "I'll stay in for the evening." The driver hesitated. "Sir, should I at least wait until you enter the house?" Obinna shook his head gently. "I'll be fine. Spend the evening with your family." The driver thanked him sincerely before driving away. Obinna stood alone outside the elegant iron gates. The security guards recognized him immediately and opened the entrance. He greeted them as he always did, asking about their children, before continuing toward the main building. The mansion stood peacefully beneath the fading evening sky. Warm lights glowed behind tall windows. Everything appeared perfectly normal. He expected to hear laughter, perhaps Adizi preparing dinner, perhaps Emika speaking on the phone about company matters. Instead, as he walked past the side garden toward the rear entrance, unfamiliar voices drifted through an open window. At first he paid little attention. Then he heard his own name. Obinna instinctively slowed his steps. He had no intention of listening to a private conversation, but something about the tone stopped him. It was unusually tense. He quietly remained beside the flowering hedge, hidden by the shadows. Inside the sitting room, Adiza spoke first. "We don't have much time anymore." Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. Emika answered without hesitation. "I know." Obinna frowned. Time for what? He assumed they were discussing business, perhaps preparations for the upcoming family announcement. Then Adize continued, "If he signs those papers before everything is ready, we'll lose most of it." Obinna felt a strange discomfort settle in his chest. What papers? He had told no one about the new succession documents except Barrister Chinedu. Emika spoke in a lower voice. "Relax. He won't sign anything if everything goes according to plan." Silence followed. Obinna leaned slightly closer without making a sound. His heartbeat quickened. Adiz sighed. "Are you absolutely certain no one will suspect anything?" "No." Emika chuckled softly. "I'm absolutely certain everyone will believe it." Obinna's fingers slowly tightened around the strap of the leather folder he was carrying. "Believe what?" Another pause. Then, Emika's next sentence shattered the world Obinna believed he knew. "An old man with a history of high blood pressure dies peacefully in his sleep." Obinna stopped breathing. "People will mourn for a few weeks," Emika continued. "Doctors will call it natural causes. Newspapers will praise his legacy. The company will move on." Adizi remained silent. Obinna prayed he had misunderstood. Surely they were discussing someone else. Surely they couldn't be talking about him. Then Adizi whispered the words that erased every remaining doubt. "My father has always trusted us." Obinna felt as though the ground beneath him had disappeared. For nearly 70 years, he had faced poverty competition, betrayal from business rivals, political pressure, and economic crises. Nothing had prepared him for this moment. His own daughter, the little girl whose tears he had wiped away, the child whose bedtime stories he had read every night, the young woman whose wedding had filled him with overwhelming joy. She was calmly discussing his death. Emika spoke again. "We only have to wait until after the family gathering." "Why then?" Adizi asked. "Because everyone expects him to retire. No one questions an elderly billionaire deciding to rest. After he's gone, we'll simply say the excitement exhausted him." Obinna instinctively reached toward the nearby wall to steady himself. His legs suddenly felt weak. Inside the room, Adizi sounded nervous. What if he changes his mind before then? He won't. And if he does, we'll move sooner. The simplicity of the answer chilled Obinna far more than shouting ever could. There was no anger, no panic, no hesitation, only calculation, only planning. Adizi lowered her voice even further. I still don't like talking about this. You like living comfortably, don't you? Amika replied. You know that's not what I mean. Then stop feeling guilty. Another long silence followed. Finally, Adizi asked the question that would haunt Obinna forever. Will it hurt him? Obinna closed his eyes. Some small part of him desperately hoped her concern meant she would abandon whatever madness had begun. Amika answered calmly. He won't suffer. There won't be blood. No. No struggle. No. He'll simply fall asleep. Obinna's heart pounded violently. His breathing became shallow. Every instinct urged him to burst into the room, to demand an explanation, to ask his daughter how she could even imagine such a thing. But decades of business experience restrained him. Emotion solved nothing. Evidence solved everything. If he confronted them now, they would deny every word. Worse, they would know he had discovered the truth. He remained perfectly still. Inside, Amika continued outlining details. We must also make sure the original will disappears. Adizi responded immediately. What about Barrister Chinedu? We'll handle him later. Obinna's eyes widened. So Chinedu might also be in danger, his oldest friend, his most trusted lawyer. The conspiracy extended beyond simple greed. It was becoming something much darker. Amika lowered his voice once again. Our biggest advantage is that everyone believes your father sees me as his own son. Adizi answered quietly. He does. And that's exactly why no one will suspect me. Those words struck Obinna harder than any physical blow. He remembered defending Amika countless times. He remembered introducing him proudly to investors. He remembered telling employees that one day Amika would help carry the company into the future. Every act of trust now felt like another weapon being turned against him. Suddenly, footsteps echoed somewhere deeper inside the house. Someone else was approaching. Amika immediately changed the subject. Let's discuss tomorrow's board presentation. Adiza understood instantly. Their voices became casual, professional, completely ordinary. Anyone entering the room would believe they had been discussing business all along. Obinna realized he could not remain there another second. Quietly, he stepped backward. Every movement felt painfully slow. He feared the sound of a single footstep might reveal his presence. When he finally reached the garden path, he turned away from the mansion instead of entering it. The security guards looked confused as they saw him walking back toward the gate. Sir, Obinna forced a faint smile. I suddenly remembered another appointment. The guards nodded respectfully. None of them questioned him. Outside the gates, Obinna stood alone beside the empty road. The mansion behind him looked exactly as it always had. Beautiful, peaceful, safe. Yet he now understood that behind those walls lived two people calmly preparing for the day he would never walk out alive. For several minutes, he simply stared into the distance. His eyes filled with tears, but none fell. Not because he felt no pain, because the pain had become too deep for tears. At last he reached into his pocket and removed his phone. His finger hovered over Adiza's name. One call, one question, one chance to hear her voice. Instead, he slowly locked the screen again. No, not yet. If his daughter and son-in-law were capable of planning his death so carefully, then confronting them without proof would only make him their first mistake, not their last. Obinna took a long, steady breath. The loving father who had trusted without question had died outside that mansion. The man who walked away would have to become something else entirely. He would uncover every truth, no matter how painful it became. Obinna Umeh did not sleep that night. He sat alone in the study of a small apartment he secretly owned in Enugu, a place he had purchased years earlier for moments when he needed complete privacy. Very few people even knew it existed. Not his daughter, not Emeka, not even most members of his executive team. The room was silent, except for the ticking of an old wall clock. Normally, Obinna enjoyed the peaceful sound. Tonight, every tick reminded him that time was no longer his ally. He replayed the conversation in his mind over and over again. Every sentence, every pause, every word. He desperately searched for another explanation. Perhaps they had been speaking about someone else. Perhaps it had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps he had missed an important part of the conversation. But every possibility collapsed beneath one undeniable fact. Adeze had clearly said, "My father has always trusted us." There was no escaping the truth. Shortly after dawn, Obinna reached for his phone and called the only man he believed could help him think clearly. Barrister Chinedu Nwosu answered after the second ring. "Good morning, Chief. I need to see you." There was something unusual in Obinna's voice. Chinedu immediately noticed it. "Is everything all right?" "No." A long silence followed. "Come to my old apartment. Come alone. Tell no one where you're going." "I'll be there within an hour." Exactly 55 minutes later, Chinedu quietly entered the apartment carrying a leather briefcase. The two men had known each other for nearly 35 years. Before becoming one of Nigeria's most respected corporate lawyers, Chinedu had represented Obinna when his business consisted of a rented warehouse and 3 employees. Their friendship had survived recessions, lawsuits, hostile competitors, and political pressure. Obinna trusted him as much as he trusted himself. The lawyer studied his friend's face. "You haven't slept." Obinna slowly shook his head. Then, without interruption, he described everything he had heard outside the mansion. He repeated every sentence exactly as he remembered it. Chinedu listened without speaking. When Obinna finally finished, the lawyer remained silent for several moments. "I wish I could tell you that you misunderstood." "So do I. But I don't think you did." Obinna lowered his eyes. The words hurt more than he expected. Chinedu leaned forward. "Have you confronted them?" "No." "Good." Obinna looked up. "You think I should remain silent?" "For now." The lawyer folded his hands together. "If they truly intend to harm you, confronting them today only tells them they must act sooner." Obinna nodded slowly. He had reached the same conclusion during the night. But silence alone won't protect you. What do you suggest? "We find evidence." Obinna sighed heavily. "Yeah." They mentioned forged documents, suspicious plans, and somehow they already know I'm preparing new succession papers. Chinedu frowned immediately. "I never told anyone." "I know. Neither did you." "Never." The lawyer's expression became serious. "Then someone has been watching us." That possibility had not fully occurred to Obinna until that moment. If information about confidential legal documents had reached Emeka, someone close to them had betrayed his trust. But who? His secretary. A member of the legal office. Someone inside the company. The thought disturbed him deeply. His business had always operated like a family. Now he wondered how many members of that family had quietly changed sides. Chinedu opened his briefcase. "I brought copies of the succession documents." He placed several folders on the table. "The originals remain inside my firm's secure archive." "Can anyone access them?" "Not legally." "Illegally," Chinedu hesitated. "No security system is perfect." Obinna stared at the papers. For years, he had believed careful planning could protect his family from conflict. Now, those same documents appeared to have become the reason someone wanted him dead. After several minutes, Chinedu spoke again. "We need someone else." "Who?" "A man who owes you nothing except the truth." Obinna understood immediately. Ibrahim Musa, the retired investigator. 20 years earlier, Ibrahim had led one of Nigeria's most respected anti-corruption units before retiring with an untarnished reputation. During a complicated fraud case involving Obinna's company, the two men had developed enormous respect for each other. Unlike many officials, Ibrahim had never accepted gifts, never accepted favors, never accepted influence. His loyalty belonged only to justice. "Sure, anyone can quietly investigate without attracting attention," Chinedu said. "It's Ibrahim." Obinna nodded. "Arrange the meeting." Later that afternoon, the three men gathered inside the apartment. Ibrahim Musa had changed little despite retirement. His hair had turned gray, but his sharp eyes missed nothing. After listening carefully to Obinna's account, he asked only one question. "Do you want revenge?" Obinna answered immediately. "No." "Good. Because revenge destroys everyone." Ibrahim gave a slight nod of approval. "Then what do you want?" "I want the truth." "And if the truth confirms everything?" Obinna remained quiet for a long moment. Finally, he answered, "Then I want justice." The retired investigator smiled faintly. "That answer tells me you're still the man I've always respected." He removed a notebook from his jacket. "Let's begin." For the next 2 hours, they listed every person who might possess sensitive information: senior executives, personal assistants, household staff, financial officers, legal clerks, board members. The list grew surprisingly long. When they finished, Ibrahim circled 3 names. "These people concern me." Obinna recognized each one immediately. The company's chief financial officer, an executive responsible for procurement, and Emeka himself. "What connects them?" Obinna asked. Ibrahim looked directly at him. "Money." The retired investigator explained his reasoning. Large conspiracies rarely depended only on family emotions. Greed attracted accomplices. Someone expecting financial reward might overlook conscience entirely. "If Emeka has promised future promotions or ownership," Ibrahim said, "he won't need many people, only the right people." That evening, Ibrahim quietly began making discreet inquiries through trusted former colleagues. Meanwhile, Chinedu started reviewing financial records that normally attracted little attention. 3 days later, the first discovery arrived. Chinedu hurried into the apartment, carrying several printed documents. "You need to see this." Obinna studied the pages. They showed transfers between consulting companies he had never heard of. Large amounts, millions of naira. Payments authorized over the previous 8 months. What are these businesses? They barely exist. Meaning, they have offices on paper, but almost no actual operations. Obinna continued reading. Each payment had supposedly covered advisory services for expansion projects. He frowned. "I never approved these." "You didn't." "So, who did D?" Chinedu pointed toward one signature. Emeka Okafor. Obinna looked closer. Several approvals also contained digital authorizations that appeared to carry his own name. His heartbeat quickened. "Those aren't mine." "I know." "Or, they forged my approval." Chinedu nodded gravely. "It appears someone has been practicing your signature for months." Before either man could continue, Ibrahim entered, carrying another folder. His face was unusually serious. "I've confirmed something." "What?" "The chief financial officer recently purchased a luxury property worth far more than his declared income. Obinna remained silent. There are also unexplained foreign transfers connected to one of Emeka's private accounts. The room grew quiet. The pieces were slowly fitting together. This was no emotional family dispute. Someone had been stealing from the company long before planning Obinna's death. The inheritance was only the final prize. Ibrahim spread photographs across the table. Several showed Emeka meeting privately with senior executives at expensive restaurants. None of the meetings appeared on official company schedules. Others showed cash deliveries, late-night gatherings, private conversations. Obinna stared at the evidence. Every photograph represented another betrayal. Every page destroyed another layer of trust he had spent decades building. Finally, he spoke. "How many people?" Ibrahim answered honestly. "I don't know yet, but more than 2. Obinna slowly leaned back in his chair. The conspiracy was larger than he had imagined. Far larger. His daughter and son-in-law were only the faces he recognized. Hidden behind them stood others who had quietly helped drain his company while waiting for the day its founder disappeared forever. For the first time since overhearing the conversation outside his mansion, Obinna understood something terrifying. The greatest danger was no longer the family living under his roof. It was the invisible network growing inside the empire he had spent his entire life creating. And somewhere within that network, someone was already watching his next move. Obinna Umeh had spent most of his life believing that trust was the strongest foundation of any successful business. Now he understood that trust, once misplaced, could become the greatest weapon an enemy possessed. 3 days after uncovering the forged approvals and suspicious financial transfers, Obinna met once again with barrister Chinedu Nwosu and retired investigator Ibrahim Musa inside the small apartment that had quietly become their headquarters. The curtains remained closed. Every phone was switched off and placed inside a metal cabinet Ibrahim insisted on using whenever they discussed sensitive matters. Obinna smiled faintly. "You still don't trust technology." Ibrahim returned the smile. "I trust it enough to know it can betray us." The atmosphere quickly became serious again. Ibrahim spread several photographs across the table. "I've continued following Emeka." Obinna carefully examined each picture. One showed Emeka entering an expensive private club that had no connection to the company. Another captured him leaving a luxury hotel shortly after midnight with the chief financial officer. A third photograph revealed him meeting a man Obinna immediately recognized. Nnamdi Eze, the procurement director. Obinna frowned. "Nnamdi has worked for me for almost 18 years. And according to company records," Ibrahim replied, "his salary could never support the lifestyle he's been living for the last 2 years. Chinedu opened another folder. "We also reviewed procurement contracts approved under Nnamdi's department." He handed several documents to Obinna. The same suppliers appear repeatedly. Obinna studied the names. Some companies looked familiar. Others did not. "Most of these contracts were awarded without competitive bidding," Chinedu explained. "How much money?" "At least 400 million naira." Obinna slowly removed his glasses. "And that's only what we've confirmed." He rubbed his forehead. "I built this company on transparency." Ibrahim nodded. "That's exactly why they needed you gone." Obinna looked up. "What do you mean? As long as you remained alive, someone eventually risked exposing them." The retired investigator pointed toward one of the contracts. "But if you died naturally, your successors would control every internal investigation." Silence filled the room. The logic was horrifying. The murder plot had never been only about inheritance. It was about eliminating the only person capable of uncovering years of corruption. Obinna's thoughts immediately turned toward Adaeze. Had she joined the conspiracy because she wanted wealth Or had Emeka manipulated her into believing lies? The question tormented him. He remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle. He remembered comforting her after childhood nightmares. He remembered proudly watching her receive her university diploma. None of those memories matched the woman whose voice he had heard discussing his death. "I still don't understand," Obinna whispered. "What changed her?" Neither Chinedu nor Ibrahim answered immediately. Finally, Chinedu spoke. "Greed rarely appears overnight. It grows quietly. Sometimes even good people stop recognizing themselves." Obinna stared through the window. "I should have seen something." "You loved your daughter," Ibrahim replied gently. "Love often notices happiness before it notices danger." The words settled heavily inside the room. After several minutes, Ibrahim changed the subject. "We have another problem." Obinna looked toward him. "They're becoming impatient." "What happened?" "I intercepted information from one of my former contacts." He slid a handwritten note across the table. "The family gathering has become their deadline." Obinna read the message twice. Emeka had reportedly told one of his associates that everything must be finished before the old man changes his mind. Obinna folded the paper carefully. "So they know I'm delaying the succession announcement." "Yes." "And they don't like it." Chinedu leaned forward. "This means we must also change our strategy." "What do you suggest?" "We stop behaving like investigators." Obinna looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "We let them believe they've already won." Ibrahim nodded in agreement. "If Emeka thinks you're suspicious, he'll disappear. But if he believes you're weak, he'll become careless." Obinna remained silent. He understood exactly what they were proposing. "I pretend nothing happened." "Exactly. You continue living normally. You smile. You attend meetings. You invite them to dinner. You even discuss retirement." The idea disgusted him. He would have to sit across from the people planning his murder and pretend he trusted them completely. Yet he knew Ibrahim was right. Emotion would only destroy the investigation. Late that afternoon, Obinna returned to the company headquarters for the first time since overhearing the conversation. Employees greeted him warmly. "Good afternoon, Chairman." "It's wonderful to see you, sir." He smiled exactly as he always had. No one suspected anything. Inside his executive office, Emeka arrived carrying several project reports. His expression appeared completely relaxed. "Good afternoon, Father." Obinna forced himself to smile. "Come in." For nearly an hour they discussed factory expansion, export opportunities, and staffing plans. Emeka answered every question confidently. Watching him speak so naturally made Obinna's heart ache. The deception was flawless. If he had not overheard that conversation himself, he would never have believed this man capable of murder. Before leaving the office, Emeka hesitated. "Father." "Yes." "I've been thinking." "About what?" "The succession announcement." Obinna remained calm. "What about it?" "I know you've postponed it twice." "I have. People are beginning to ask questions." Obinna nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. I simply don't want unnecessary rumors affecting investor confidence." Obinna looked directly into Emeka's eyes. "You'll have your answer soon." Emeka smiled politely. "I appreciate that." After he left, Obinna remained seated for several minutes. He replayed every facial expression, every movement, every word. Not once had Emeka shown fear. Not once had he suspected that the truth was already known. That evening, Obinna returned to the mansion for dinner. Adaze embraced him warmly at the entrance. "Dad, we've missed you." He hugged her gently. "So have I." She looked into his face. "You seem tired." "I've simply been working too much." "You need to rest." The irony pierced his heart. The woman, encouraging him to rest, was secretly waiting for him never to wake again. During dinner, conversation flowed easily. They laughed about old family stories. They discussed charitable projects. They even planned the upcoming family gathering. To anyone watching, they appeared to be a loving family. Only Obinna knew that beneath every smile lay hidden intentions. As the meal ended, Adizi poured him a cup of herbal tea. His hand paused before lifting the cup. A brief silence settled over the table. Emeka noticed. "Is something wrong?" Obinna smiled calmly. "No." He picked up the cup. Then, pretending to receive an urgent phone call, he stood. "Excuse me for a moment." He carried the untouched tea into his study. Once alone, he quietly poured every drop into a small glass bottle Ibrahim had given him earlier that day, just in case. He sealed the bottle carefully. For the first time, the conspiracy had produced something tangible. Not proof, not yet, but enough to make Obinna realize that every meal, every drink, every ordinary family moment from now onward might carry a hidden danger. The countdown had begun, and somewhere inside his own home, the people he loved most were running out of patience. The next morning, Obinna Umeh woke before dawn, long before the household staff began their daily routines. He stood alone on the balcony outside his bedroom, watching the first rays of sunlight spread across the hills surrounding Enugu. Normally, mornings brought him peace. They reminded him that every new day carried another chance to improve someone's life. Now, each sunrise reminded him of something else. He had survived another night. He quietly returned inside, dressed more slowly than usual, and deliberately skipped his morning exercise. When Adizi saw him entering the dining room, she immediately frowned. "Dad, are you feeling all right?" Obinna forced a tired smile. "I didn't sleep very well." She walked closer and touched his arm. "Perhaps you should postpone today's meetings." Before Obinna could answer, Emeka joined them. "I agree," he said. "You've been working too hard these past few weeks." Obinna looked from one face to the other. Their concern sounded convincing. Anyone else would have believed it came from love. Only he knew how carefully every word was being measured. "I'll manage," he replied softly. "Age catches up with everyone eventually." He noticed a brief glance pass between Adiza and Emeka. It lasted only a second, but Ibrahim had once taught him that the smallest exchanges often revealed the biggest secrets. Obinna lowered himself into his chair more slowly than necessary. He intentionally allowed his hand to tremble slightly while lifting his cup of coffee. The performance had begun. If Emeka believed his health was rapidly declining, he might become careless. That was exactly what Ibrahim wanted. Later that morning, Obinna arrived at company headquarters, looking noticeably weaker than usual. Several employees immediately noticed the change. His longtime secretary, Stella Okoye, hurried toward him. "Chairman, should I call your doctor?" Obinna smiled warmly. "No, Stella. I simply need more rest." She still looked worried. "You've never looked this exhausted." "Perhaps retirement is finally calling me." The comment spread through the office faster than he expected. Within an hour, nearly everyone had heard that the chairman appeared unwell. That afternoon, Ibrahim called. "The rumor is already moving." "Good. I've also confirmed something." "What?" "Emeka left the office twice today without recording where he went." "Did you follow him?" "Yes." "He visited a private pharmacy." Obinna remained silent. "What did he buy?" "We don't know yet." "But he paid cash." The information unsettled Obinna. It proved nothing. Yet, under the circumstances, every unexplained action carried new meaning. That evening, Ibrahim arrived at the apartment carrying a small sealed package. "What is it?" Obinna asked. "A precaution." Inside the package were several compact laboratory containers. If anyone serves you food or drinks that seem unusual, preserve a sample. You think they're already trying? I think they're becoming impatient. Obinna nodded. He carefully placed the containers inside a locked drawer. Chinedu arrived shortly afterward with another update. I've completed the charitable trust documents. Obinna looked relieved. Already? And they were finalized this afternoon. The lawyer handed him several certified copies. As of today, 45% of your personal shares no longer pass directly through inheritance. Obinna smiled for the first time in days. Can anyone reverse it? Not without your written consent. And nobody knows. Only the three of us. That decision changed everything. Even if the conspirators succeeded, nearly half of the fortune they expected to inherit would already belong to hospitals, scholarship programs, and widows' assistance funds across Nigeria. The irony comforted Obinna. The wealth they were willing to kill for was quietly slipping beyond their reach. The following day, another unexpected ally appeared. Her name was Mama Ngozi Eze. She had worked in Obinna's household for nearly 28 years. She had joined the family shortly after Adize's mother passed away and had remained ever since. To Adize, she had always been more than a housekeeper. She had been like an aunt. To Obinna, she was one of the few people whose loyalty had never once been questioned. That afternoon, Mama Ngozi knocked gently on the door of Obinna's private study. "Sir? Come in." She hesitated before speaking. "There is something troubling me." Obinna immediately gave her his full attention. "Oh. What is it?" She lowered her voice. "I may be imagining things. Tell me anyway." She glanced toward the closed door. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've noticed Master Emeka entering the kitchen more often." Obinna remained perfectly calm. "Is that unusual?" "Very. He has never cared about the kitchen before." "What does he do?" "I don't know. He always sends everyone away first." Obinna felt a chill run through him. "When?" "Mostly late at night." "Has he taken anything?" "I've never seen clearly." She looked embarrassed. "I didn't want to accuse anyone unfairly." "You did the right thing by telling me." Mama Ngozi sighed with visible relief. "I've also noticed something else." "What?" "Your herbal tea." Obinna's heartbeat quickened. "What about it?" "The brand changed." He frowned. "I didn't ask anyone to change it." "I know. I've purchased the same tea for 6 years." "When did it change?" "About 10 days ago." Obinna remembered the cup Adize had poured during dinner, the one he had secretly preserved instead of drinking. He quietly walked toward the cabinet and removed the sealed bottle. Mama Ngozi looked surprised. "You kept it?" "Yes." He explained nothing further. Instead, he immediately called Ibrahim. 40 minutes later, the retired investigator arrived. He carefully examined the bottle without opening it. "This goes to a laboratory tonight. I know someone I trust completely. No company connections. No government interference. No leaks." Mama Ngozi watched the conversation nervously. "Sir?" Obinna turned toward her. "I don't want anything bad to happen to you." He smiled gently. "You've protected this family for nearly 3 decades. It's my turn to protect you." Tears filled the elderly woman's eyes. "I still remember when Miss Adize was a little girl." "So do I. She used to help me bake birthday cakes." Obinna looked away. "I know. I don't understand what happened." Neither did he. Perhaps he never truly would. 2 days later, Ibrahim returned carrying an envelope. His face revealed nothing. Obinna immediately stood. "What did the laboratory find?" Ibrahim placed the report on the table. The tea contained abnormal concentrations of prescription sedatives. Obinna slowly opened the report. The findings were unmistakable. The substance alone was unlikely to kill a healthy adult, but in an elderly man with a history of high blood pressure, repeated exposure could create dangerous complications. Accidents, heart failure, unexpected collapse. Exactly the kind of death Emeka had described outside the mansion. "There it is," Ibrahim said quietly. "The first real evidence." Obinna stared silently at the report. His hands remained steady, his breathing calm. Yet inside, another part of his heart quietly broke. Someone inside his own home had already moved beyond planning. The attempt had begun, and if the conspirators realized their first strategy had failed, there was little doubt they would soon search for another. Obinna Umeh held the laboratory report in his hands long after Ibrahim Musa and barrister Chinedu Nwosu had left the apartment. The words on the page did not simply confirm the presence of sedatives, they confirmed something far more painful. Someone inside the home where he had built a lifetime of memories had crossed the line between cruel intentions and deliberate action. The betrayal was no longer an idea. It had become reality. He carefully folded the report and placed it inside a locked drawer before walking to the small bookshelf near the window. On the highest shelf rested an old family photo album. He had not opened it in years. Slowly, he carried it to the table and brushed away a thin layer of dust. The first photograph showed a much younger Obinna standing beside his late wife, Ifunanya, outside the tiny church where they had married. Neither of them wore expensive clothes. His suit had been borrowed from a cousin. Her wedding dress had been sewn by local women from their village, yet neither of them had ever looked happier. Obinna smiled sadly. "If only you were still here," he whispered. He turned another page. There was baby Adeza, wrapped in a pink blanket, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. He remembered the day vividly. He had been terrified of becoming a father. He worried he would never earn enough money to provide for his family. Ifunanya had laughed at his fears. "Our daughter doesn't need a perfect father," she had said. "She only needs a loving one." Those words had guided him for decades. Another page revealed a Daisy taking her first steps across the living room floor. He could almost hear her laughter. She had fallen twice before finally reaching him, with both tiny hands stretched toward his chest. He remembered lifting her high into the air while she squealed with delight. Back then, he believed nothing could ever separate them. The memories continued. Her first day at school, her missing front tooth, the science competition she had won at 13, the afternoon she proudly showed him her university admission letter. Every photograph represented another sacrifice, another promise kept, another dream fulfilled. Obinna closed his eyes. Where had everything gone wrong? Was it after wealth entered their lives? Had he spent too much time building his company? Had he mistaken comfort for love? The questions circled endlessly through his mind. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Ibrahim. "I thought I might find you here." Obinna quietly nodded. "I've been remembering." The retired investigator noticed the photographs scattered across the table. "You loved her very much." "I still do." Ibrahim pulled out a chair. "That's what makes this difficult." Obinna looked directly at him. "I've investigated dishonest executives. I've negotiated with ruthless competitors. I've forgiven people who stole from me. But I don't know how to fight my own daughter." His voice trembled for the first time since the nightmare had begun. "I keep hoping she'll wake up tomorrow and tell me this has all been a terrible mistake." Ibrahim remained silent. Sometimes no advice could ease another man's pain. After several minutes, Obinna spoke again. "When Adaze was 8 years old, she became seriously ill." Ibrahim listened carefully. "The doctors suspected pneumonia." She spent 6 days in the hospital. I didn't leave her bedside once. He smiled faintly. I held her hand every night because she was afraid to sleep alone. Another memory surfaced. When she recovered, she told everyone that I was the strongest father in Nigeria. His smile disappeared. Today she believes I'm simply an obstacle standing between her and money. Ibrahim finally answered. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone slowly changed the person she used to be. Obinna considered the possibility. Emeka, maybe. But don't remove her responsibility. No one can force another adult to betray someone they love. Those words were difficult to accept because they were true. Love explained much. It excused nothing. Later that afternoon, Obinna decided to visit a place he had not seen for several months. Without informing anyone, he drove himself to the modest cemetery where Ifunanya had been buried 26 years earlier. The grounds were peaceful. Birds sang from nearby trees. Fresh flowers rested beside several graves. Obinna carried a small bouquet of white lilies. They had been Ifunanya's favorite. He knelt beside the headstone. I've failed. The words escaped before he could stop them. A cool breeze moved through the trees. I gave her everything. I protected her. I loved her. But somehow, his voice broke. I couldn't protect her heart. For several minutes, he simply remained there. No tears came. The grief had settled too deeply for tears. Eventually, he stood and placed the flowers carefully against the stone. I don't know how this story ends, but I promise you one thing. I won't let hatred destroy what's left of this family. On the drive back, Obinna stopped unexpectedly near an orphanage his foundation had supported for years. Children were playing football in the dusty courtyard. The moment they recognized him, several ran toward the gate. Grandpa Obinna. He laughed despite everything weighing upon him. The children never called him chairman, never billionaire, never sir. Only Grandpa Obinna. One little girl named Chinelo proudly showed him a drawing she had made. It depicted a large house surrounded by smiling children. Is this your home? Obinna asked. She nodded enthusiastically. And you're standing right there. She pointed to a figure holding hands with everyone else. Obinna looked at the drawing quietly. You made me taller than everyone. She giggled. Because you're always protecting us. The innocent words pierced his heart. Protecting us. He had spent decades protecting strangers, providing scholarships, building clinics, paying for surgeries, supporting widows. Yet somehow, he had failed to protect the one relationship that mattered most. As he prepared to leave the orphanage, Director approached him. The children pray for you every Sunday. Obinna looked surprised. For me, yes. They say you're the reason they still believe kind people exist. During the drive home, those words stayed with him. Kind people exist. Perhaps that was why he could not allow bitterness to consume him. If he surrendered to anger, now, everything he had believed throughout his life would become meaningless. That evening, Ibrahim met him once again. I've been thinking, Obinna said. About what? If this investigation ends with Adize in prison. He struggled to finish the sentence. Then I've lost my daughter forever. Ibrahim looked at him carefully. And if you stop the investigation, Obinna remained silent. You lose your life. Another long pause followed, and countless innocent employees lose the company you built. The truth was unavoidable. This battle was no longer only about family. It was about justice, about protecting thousands of workers whose livelihoods depended on the company, about preventing corruption from consuming everything he had created. Obinna slowly straightened his shoulders. For the first time since overhearing the conspiracy, something inside him changed. He would continue loving his daughter. Nothing could erase that. But love could no longer blind him. From this moment forward, he would pursue the truth with the same determination that had lifted a poor village boy into one of Nigeria's most respected businessmen. No matter how heartbreaking that truth ultimately became, by the beginning of the following week, Obinna Umeh had accepted a painful reality. He could no longer separate his roles as a father and as the founder of one of Nigeria's largest companies. Every decision he made now would affect not only his family, but also thousands of employees whose livelihoods depended on the business he had spent nearly 5 decades building. For years, he had postponed discussing succession because he wanted to avoid conflict. Ironically, that delay had allowed a far more dangerous conflict to grow in secret. Now he needed to act before his enemies realized how much he already knew. Early Monday morning, Obinna invited barrister Chinedu Nwosu and Ibrahim Musa to the apartment for another strategy meeting. "The investigation has given us enough to understand their motive," Obinna said. "But understanding isn't enough anymore." Ibrahim nodded. "They're expecting to inherit control. So we make sure they can't." Chinedu opened a thick folder filled with legal documents. "I've prepared several corporate restructuring proposals." Obinna carefully examined each page. The first proposal transferred voting authority for major company decisions to an independent board for a fixed period after his retirement. The second required unanimous approval from multiple trustees before any significant company assets could be sold. The third established an employee ownership trust that would gradually distribute shares to long-serving workers over the next 10 years. Obinna smiled faintly. "I like this one." Chinedu looked pleased. "You always said the people who built the company deserved to share in its future." "They do." For decades, Obinna had watched factory workers arrive before sunrise, often sacrificing weekends and holidays to keep production running. Many had remained loyal during years when competitors tried to lure them away with higher salaries. He had never forgotten those sacrifices. "If anything happens to me," Obinna said quietly, "I don't want thousands of families depending entirely on whoever inherits my name." Ibrahim leaned forward. "This plan changes everything." "Exactly. If Emeka succeeds, he'll discover he doesn't actually control the company." Obinna nodded. "And by then, it will be too late." Within 48 hours, Chinedu quietly began implementing the restructuring through legal channels that required no public announcement. Only a handful of trusted professionals knew what was happening. No information reached the mansion. At least, that was the hope. Meanwhile, Obinna continued behaving exactly as the conspirators expected. He attended meetings. He smiled during family dinners. He discussed retirement openly. He even joked about finally taking a long vacation after decades of endless work. Each performance became more difficult than the last. Every time Adizi laughed beside him, memories of her childhood returned uninvited. Every time Emeka respectfully called him father, Obinna remembered proudly introducing him as the son he had never had. The deception exhausted him, yet it was necessary. On Wednesday afternoon, Emeka entered Obinna's office carrying several financial reports. "I've finalized next quarter's projections." Obinna accepted the documents. "Excellent." Emeka hesitated. "I've also spoken with several board members." "Oh, they're excited about your succession announcement." Obinna looked up calmly. "I imagine they are. They believe stability will reassure investors." Obinna slowly closed the report. "I've been thinking about stability myself." Emeka smiled politely. "I'm glad to hear that. What do you think creates lasting stability?" The question seemed harmless. Emeka answered without hesitation. "Strong leadership." "Anything else?" "Clear authority." Obinna nodded thoughtfully. I've learned something different over the years. Emeka waited. I believe lasting stability comes from systems, not individuals. For the first time, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossed Emeka's face. It disappeared almost instantly. I suppose both are important. Perhaps, Obinna smiled. We'll discuss it soon. After Emeka left, Ibrahim emerged quietly from a side office connected to the chairman's suite. He had been reviewing archived files while avoiding detection. You were testing him. A little. What did you learn? He assumes everything depends on one person's authority. Ibrahim nodded. Which means he still expects to control everything after you're gone. Exactly. That evening, another development unexpectedly strengthened their position. One of Ibrahim's former colleagues contacted him with confidential information. The chief financial officer had attempted to access historical authorization records from the company's secure digital archive. When? Obinna asked. Yesterday. Did he succeed? No. The system rejected his credentials. Shinedu frowned. Why would he suddenly need old authorization files? Obinna answered before anyone else. Yeah. Because they're trying to compare forged signatures. The room fell silent. If Emeka's group feared discrepancies between genuine and fabricated approvals, it meant they were becoming nervous. Pressure was forcing mistakes. The following morning, Obinna announced an executive leadership retreat scheduled for the following week. The meeting would gather senior managers, board members, and department heads at the company's conference center outside Enugu. Officially, the purpose was long-term strategic planning. Unofficially, it served another goal. It forced every key executive to remain together under controlled conditions while Ibrahim quietly continued investigating financial records. The announcement received enthusiastic support. Only Ibrahim understood its true value. You're narrowing their options, he said afterward. They won't know where to focus. That's the idea. At the mansion, however, something else was changing. Mama Ngozi noticed it before anyone else. That evening, she quietly approached Obinna while clearing the dining table. Sir? Yes. Master Emeka seems restless. In what way? He keeps making private phone calls outside. Every night. Obinna remained calm. Anything else? He asks whether you've confirmed the date of the family gathering almost every day. Obinna thanked her without asking further questions. Later, he shared the information with Ibrahim. They're watching the calendar, Ibrahim concluded. They've built their entire plan around that event. Then we keep the date. You don't want to postpone it. Obinna slowly shook his head. No. If we delay now, they'll know something has changed. And if we proceed, Obinna looked directly at him, they'll believe they're walking toward victory. A slow smile appeared on Ibrahim's face, when, in reality, they'll be walking into a trap. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, Obinna felt a small measure of control returning. He still carried enormous pain. His daughter's betrayal remained an open wound. But he was no longer reacting to events. He was beginning to shape them. Hidden beneath the ordinary routines of board meetings, family dinners, and retirement discussions, an invisible battle had begun. One side believed it was counting down to an old man's final days. The other was quietly preparing for the moment every lie, every forged signature, and every act of betrayal would finally be dragged into the light. And neither Adazi nor Emeka had the slightest idea that the future they had already claimed in their minds was slipping away one carefully planned move at a time. The date of the family gathering was now only 4 days away. Inside the Umeh mansion, everything appeared peaceful. The gardeners trimmed hedges along the driveway. The kitchen staff discussed menus for the upcoming dinner. Security guards greeted visitors with their usual professionalism. Every corner of the estate reflected the calm order that Obinna Umeh had spent decades creating. Only a handful of people knew that beneath the surface, every passing hour brought the family closer to a confrontation that would change all of their lives forever. Obinna continued following Ibrahim Musa's instructions exactly. He maintained his normal routine. He attended meetings. He spoke warmly with Adeza. He praised Emeka's recent work in front of senior executives. The performance had become almost second nature, though every smile required enormous effort. Meanwhile, Ibrahim expanded his investigation. Rather than concentrating only on financial crimes, he began studying the personal movements of everyone closely connected to Emeka. Patterns soon emerged: late-night meetings, private phone calls, unscheduled visits to locations that had nothing to do with company business. One name appeared repeatedly: Dr. Vincent Okori. The physician operated a private medical clinic on the outskirts of Enugu. His reputation among patients was respectable, but Ibrahim's former contacts revealed something unusual. The doctor had accumulated significant gambling debts over the previous 2 years. Several creditors had recently stopped demanding payment. Someone had settled the accounts. When Ibrahim traced the financial trail, he found that the money had passed through one of the shell companies previously linked to Emeka. The discovery immediately alarmed him. That evening, he placed the evidence before Obinna and Chinedu. "I don't believe this is a coincidence." Obinna examined the documents carefully. "You think they've recruited him?" "I don't know, but a doctor with heavy debts who suddenly receives unexplained financial relief deserves attention." Chinedu frowned. If someone wanted an elderly man with high blood pressure to die naturally, a doctor's opinion would become extremely valuable. Ibrahim finished. The room fell silent. For the first time, the conspiracy appeared to extend beyond company executives. It might also include someone capable of influencing medical records. Obinna slowly leaned back in his chair. "So, even if I survived an attempt, someone could still certify a natural death," Ibrahim said quietly. The possibility chilled everyone in the room. The following afternoon, another unexpected development occurred. Obinna received a phone call from Emeka. "Father, are you free this evening?" "I should be. I've arranged a small dinner at home. Just family." Obinna hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "I'll be there." After ending the call, he immediately contacted Ibrahim. "Dinner." "When?" "Tonight." Ibrahim considered the invitation. "They're accelerating." "You think so?" "The timing is too convenient." Mama Ngozi was also contacted privately. When she answered Ibrahim's call, her voice sounded nervous. "I've noticed something strange." "What is it?" "Master Emeka personally instructed the chef to prepare Chairman Obinna's favorite pepper soup. Has he ever done that before?" "Never." "And he insisted on supervising the kitchen himself." Ibrahim exchanged a serious glance with Obinna. "This may be another test." "What should I do?" Obinna asked. "The same thing you've done before. Preserve everything." That evening, Obinna arrived at the mansion shortly before 7. Daisy greeted him warmly. "Dad, you look much better." "I've been getting more rest." She smiled with obvious relief. "I'm happy to hear that." The dining room had been beautifully prepared. Candles decorated the table. Soft music played in the background. Everything resembled the comfortable family dinners they had enjoyed for years. Only Obinna knew that appearances could no longer be trusted. As they sat down, Emeka raised his glass. "To family. To new beginnings." Obinna Mamas lifted his own glass. "To honesty." For the briefest moment, Emeka's smile stiffened. Then he laughed lightly. "I couldn't agree more." Dinner began. The pepper soup was placed before Obinna first. Its aroma was exactly as he remembered. Mama Ngozi served the remaining dishes while avoiding eye contact. Obinna understood why. She feared revealing that something was wrong. He tasted a single spoonful. Nothing seemed unusual. Still, he deliberately ate very little. Halfway through the meal, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed Ibrahim's name. Perfect timing. "Please excuse me," Obinna said. "I need to take this." He carried his bowl into the study before answering. There was no conversation. The call existed only to provide an excuse. Working quickly, Obinna transferred several spoonfuls of soup into one of the sterile containers Ibrahim had supplied earlier. He sealed it carefully. Then he returned to the dining room carrying the untouched bowl. "I'm sorry. An urgent business matter." Emeka smiled politely. "Nothing serious, I hope." "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." The meal continued. Conversation remained pleasant. Adiza spoke excitedly about expanding one of the company's charitable programs. Obinna listened carefully. He wondered whether she truly cared about helping others, or whether the words had become another carefully practiced performance. After dessert, Emeka casually introduced another topic. "Father, yes. I've already invited several close friends to the succession celebration." Obinna looked surprised. "You've planned that far ahead?" "I assumed you wouldn't mind." Obinna smiled calmly. "I'm sure everything will work out." Again, he noticed that quick exchange of glances between Adizi and Emeka. Hope, expectation, confidence. They genuinely believed they were only days away from controlling his empire. When Obinna finally left the mansion, Ibrahim was waiting inside a nearby vehicle parked several streets away. The evidence container was transferred immediately. "I'll have this tested tonight." Obinna nodded. As Ibrahim prepared to leave, his phone rang. He answered quickly. Within seconds, his expression changed. "What happened?" Obinna asked. Ibrahim ended the call. "One of my former colleagues has disappeared." "Who?" "The accountant who secretly copied several financial records for us." Obinna felt his stomach tighten. "Missing?" "He failed to return home. His family reported him gone 2 hours ago." The news struck like a thunderbolt. Until now, the conspiracy had focused on Obinna. Now, another person connected to the investigation had vanished. Whether the disappearance was voluntary or forced remained unknown. But one fact was suddenly impossible to ignore. Someone had realized that information was leaking, and whoever stood behind the wider conspiracy was no longer willing to rely solely on careful planning. They had begun eliminating risks. For the first time since overhearing the conversation outside his mansion, Obinna understood that the battle had entered an entirely new phase. The danger no longer belonged only to him. Anyone helping uncover the truth had become a potential target. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes were searching for the next person who knew too much. The disappearance of the accountant changed everything. Until that moment, Obinna Umeh had believed the conspiracy was carefully calculated, driven by greed rather than desperation. Now it was becoming something far more dangerous. Whoever stood behind the operation was willing to silence anyone who threatened their plans. Just before sunrise, Ibrahim Musa arrived at the apartment carrying 2 sealed envelopes. His face was grim. The laboratory finished analyzing the soup. Obinna looked at him without speaking. "The results are similar to the tea." Chinedu opened the report and quickly scanned the findings. "The same family of sedatives." "Different composition," Ibrahim added, "but designed to produce the same effect if taken repeatedly." Obinna slowly exhaled. "So it wasn't my imagination?" "No. And it wasn't an accident." Ibrahim placed the report beside the earlier laboratory analysis. Two separate incidents. Two different meals. The probability of coincidence is practically zero. Silence settled over the room. Obinna had hoped that perhaps the tea had been contaminated by mistake. Now that hope disappeared. Someone had intentionally introduced drugs into his food on more than one occasion. Chinedu carefully organized the documents into a secure folder. These reports are admissible, but by themselves they don't identify who administered the substances. Ibrahim nodded. They prove an attempt. They don't yet prove the person responsible. Obinna remained calm. Then we continue. There will be no confrontation, not until everything is undeniable. Ibrahim handed him the second envelope. We've also located the missing accountant. Obinna immediately looked up. Is he alive? Yes. Relief briefly crossed Obinna's face. What happened? He checked himself into a motel outside Nsukka. Why would he disappear? He was frightened. Ibrahim explained that one of his former colleagues had persuaded the accountant to meet privately during the night. The man admitted receiving anonymous threats. Someone had called repeatedly warning him to stop asking questions about old financial records. His wife had also noticed a vehicle parked outside their home for 2 consecutive evenings. Believing his family was in danger, he left without telling anyone except a trusted relative. He thought disappearing would protect his children, Ibrahim said. Did he identify the caller? No. The number was hidden. But he recorded one conversation. Obinna leaned forward. He recorded it? Ibrahim nodded. He became suspicious after the first call. The retired investigator placed a small digital recorder on the table. I've already listened. What did you hear? The speaker disguised his voice, but one sentence stood out. He pressed the play button. Static filled the room before a distorted male voice emerged. Forget the documents. The old man won't be around much longer anyway. The recording ended. No one spoke. The room felt colder. Even with the altered voice, the message was unmistakable. Someone expected Obinna's death to happen soon. Chinedu carefully switched off the recorder. Now we have evidence that the threats extend beyond the family, and that the financial fraud and murder plot are connected, Ibrahim added. Obinna stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the city was slowly waking. People were opening shops. Children were walking to school. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet, somewhere nearby, people were calmly discussing the end of his life. After several minutes, Obinna turned back toward the others. How much time do you think we have? Ibrahim answered honestly. Very little. They've already tried twice. The family gathering remains their best opportunity. Obinna nodded. Then we let them believe everything is proceeding exactly as planned. Later that morning, Obinna attended the executive leadership retreat he had announced earlier. Senior managers filled the conference hall. Department heads presented quarterly reports. Investors joined through video calls. Everything appeared perfectly routine. During a break between sessions, Amika approached him with a confident smile. Father, excellent presentations today. Thank you. I've learned from the best. Obinna smiled politely. I'm glad to hear that. Emeka lowered his voice. I've also finalized preparations for Saturday. The entire family is looking forward to celebrating your retirement. Obinna maintained steady eye contact. So am I. As Amika walked away, Ibrahim, who attended the retreat as an external governance consultant, quietly observed the exchange from across the room. Later, he joined Obinna during lunch. He looks relaxed. He believes we're exactly where he wants us. Good. Confidence creates mistakes. The afternoon sessions ended without incident. However, just as Obinna prepared to leave, his personal assistant hurried toward him. "Chairman." "What is it?" "A courier delivered this." She handed him a plain brown envelope. There was no return address, no company logo, only his name written in block letters. Obinna thanked her and waited until he reached his private office before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Across the center, someone had typed one sentence: "Stop changing the future. Accept your time." Nothing else. No signature, no explanation. Chinedu examined the paper carefully. "They know you're making changes." "But how?" Obinna asked. "The restructuring was confidential." Ibrahim looked thoughtful. "Not completely. There must still be someone inside the legal or administrative process feeding information outward." Another leak. Another invisible enemy. Obinna realized the circle of betrayal remained larger than they had estimated. That evening, Ibrahim finally received the results of another financial review. This time the findings were even more disturbing. One of the shell companies linked to Amica had recently transferred a substantial payment to an overseas account belonging to an international security consultant. The consultant specialized in private surveillance. "He wasn't hired for protection," Ibrahim explained. "He was hired to monitor people." "Who?" Obinna asked. "We're still tracing the details. But I believe someone has been watching your movements for months." Obinna thought back to several strange incidents over the previous year. Cars that seemed to appear repeatedly. Unknown callers who disconnected without speaking. Meetings that outsiders somehow learned about. At the time, each event had seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern. Someone had been preparing long before he overheard that conversation outside the mansion. This conspiracy had not been created in a few weeks. It had been carefully built over many months, perhaps even years. Before leaving for the night, Ibrahim looked directly at Obinna. "From this moment onward, never go anywhere alone." Obinna smiled faintly. "I've spent most of my life walking without fear." "I know. But now your greatest strength is staying alive long enough to expose them." Obinna nodded. He understood. The battle was approaching its decisive moment. The evidence was growing stronger. The conspirators were becoming bolder. And somewhere beyond the walls of his own home, unseen allies of Amica were beginning to realize that their perfect plan was quietly unraveling. They would not surrender without one final attempt. Obinna was certain of that, and he intended to be ready when it came. 3 days remained before the family gathering. For the first time since the investigation had begun, Ibrahim Musa believed the balance of power was beginning to shift. The conspirators still believed they controlled the situation, but every passing day produced more evidence against them. Their greatest weakness was no longer the forged documents or the suspicious financial transfers. It was fear. People who believed they were about to succeed rarely made mistakes. People who sensed their plan might fail often made many. That morning, Ibrahim received an urgent call from one of his former intelligence contacts. "I've got something you need to see." An hour later, Ibrahim met the man inside a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Enugu. The contact placed several printed photographs on the table. They were taken yesterday. The first image showed Amica leaving a private office building. The second showed him entering a luxury SUV. The third caused Ibrahim's eyes to narrow. Inside the vehicle sat the company's chief financial officer and procurement director. The 3 men appeared deeply engaged in conversation. "What were they discussing?" Ibrahim asked. "We couldn't hear. But we followed them afterward." The contact produced another photograph. This one showed the SUV parked outside an abandoned warehouse near the industrial district. "No business operations occur there," he explained. "They remained inside for almost 90 minutes. Ibrahim immediately understood the significance. Conspirators rarely gathered in abandoned buildings unless they wished to avoid witnesses. He thanked the contact and left without delay. Within the hour, Obinna and Barrister Chinedu were studying the photographs. "They're worried," Ibrahim concluded. "Otherwise, they would have met in their offices." Chinedu agreed. "They're adapting." "So must we." Obinna remained thoughtful. "What if they're discussing another attempt?" "They probably are," Ibrahim answered. "The laboratory reports failed to produce the result they expected. And you've delayed the succession announcement. Pressure is building." Obinna slowly folded the photographs. Pressure makes people dangerous. Later that afternoon, Obinna attended another board meeting. Everything appeared ordinary. Quarterly reports, investment projections, factory expansion. No one watching would have imagined that several executives sitting around the polished conference table secretly feared one another. During the meeting, Obinna deliberately announced a small change. "I've decided to move the succession speech to the end of Saturday's gathering instead of the beginning." The statement was carefully planned. He wanted to observe reactions. Most directors simply nodded. Only Emeka hesitated. The pause lasted less than 2 seconds, but Obinna noticed. So did Ibrahim, who attended as governance advisor. After the meeting ended, Emeka approached Obinna privately. "Father." "Yes. I thought the announcement would happen immediately after dinner. I've changed my mind." "May I ask why?" Obinna smiled calmly. "I've waited 70 years. I don't think another hour will matter." Emeka forced a smile. "Of course. But the guests may become impatient. They'll survive." Emeka laughed politely before walking away. Yet his confident expression had disappeared. For the first time since this nightmare began, Obinna had seen uncertainty in his son-in-law's eyes. That evening, another unexpected development occurred. Mama Ngozi quietly knocked on Obinna's bedroom door. "Sir?" "Come in." She closed the door behind her. "I overheard something." Obinna immediately gave her his full attention. "What did you hear?" "I was cleaning the upstairs hallway. Master Emeka was speaking on the phone." "What did he say?" She hesitated, trying to remember the exact words. "I clearly heard him say—" She swallowed. "If he delays again, we'll use the other plan." Obinna's expression remained calm. Did he mention what the other plan was? No. The call ended almost immediately. But he sounded angry. That information confirmed Ibrahim's fears. The conspirators possessed multiple options. The poisoned food had not been their only strategy. When Ibrahim arrived later that night, he listened carefully. "This changes our priorities." "How?" "We've been waiting for them to make another mistake." He paused. "We may not have that luxury anymore." Obinna understood. If another plan existed, they needed to discover it before Saturday. The following morning, Ibrahim assigned 2 trusted investigators to discreetly monitor every vehicle entering or leaving the mansion. Meanwhile, Chinedu quietly requested additional security around the legal archive containing the original succession documents. Every possible target was strengthened. Despite these precautions, tension continued rising. Around midday, Obinna received another surprise. A daisy appeared unexpectedly at his office, carrying homemade lunch. "Dad, I thought you might skip another meal." She smiled warmly as she placed the containers on his desk. "I cooked your favorite vegetable stew." For a brief moment, Obinna saw the little girl she used to be. The daughter who proudly brought him handmade birthday cards. The teenager who waited awake until he returned from business trips. The young woman who once insisted on learning how to cook because she wanted to prepare meals exactly the way her late mother had. His heart tightened. "Thank you." She looked relieved. "You've seemed distant lately." "I've simply been busy." "I miss talking with you." "So do I." Those words were completely true. Adizi pulled a chair closer. After Saturday, she smiled hopefully. Perhaps you'll finally have time to relax. Obinna looked at her carefully. I hope so. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Adiza reached across the desk and gently held his hand. I love you, Dad. The simple sentence nearly shattered his composure. He searched her face desperately. Was she pretending? Was there genuine affection still hidden beneath the greed? Or had she become so skilled at deception that even love itself had become another performance? He squeezed her hand gently. I've always loved you too. She smiled before leaving the office. The moment the door closed, Obinna remained perfectly still. His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. When Ibrahim entered a few minutes later, he immediately understood. She came. Obinna nodded. She brought me lunch. Did you eat it? No. I preserved samples. Ibrahim placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing. Obinna looked toward the untouched meal. I don't know what's harder anymore. What? Believing she wants me dead. He paused. Or hoping she doesn't. That evening, the laboratory received yet another food sample. While technicians began their analysis, Ibrahim reviewed surveillance reports from the mansion. Nothing unusual had occurred. No unknown visitors. No suspicious deliveries. Everything appeared normal. Yet experience had taught him one important lesson. The most dangerous plans often hid behind ordinary routines. As Saturday drew closer, every member of the conspiracy seemed to be moving into position. Some carried confidence, others carried fear. Only one thing remained certain. When the family finally gathered beneath the roof of the Umeh mansion, someone intended that the evening would end with Obinna's empire changing hands forever. The only question still unanswered was whether the celebration would become the conspirators' greatest triumph, or the moment their entire deception collapsed before everyone they had worked so hard to fool. Saturday arrived beneath a brilliant blue sky. From the outside, the Umeh mansion looked exactly as it had during countless family celebrations over the years. Fresh flowers lined the entrance. Luxury vehicles arrived one after another through the main gate. Staff members welcomed guests with practiced smiles, while photographers captured every handshake and greeting. To everyone in attendance, the afternoon promised to become one of the most memorable milestones in Nigerian business. Chairman Obinna Umeh, the self-made billionaire whose company had transformed thousands of lives, was finally expected to announce his retirement and introduce the next generation of leadership. No one suspected that another announcement was quietly preparing to reshape far more than the future of a corporation. Obinna stood alone inside his private study, adjusting the cuffs of his navy blue suit. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Barrister Chinedu Nwosu. The board members have arrived. Good. The trustees. They're here as well. Obinna nodded. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Over the previous 48 hours, Chinedu had quietly invited several additional guests whose names did not appear on the public program. Representatives of the charitable trust, independent auditors, 2 retired judges whom Obinna respected deeply. None of them knew the complete reason for their invitation. They had simply been told that an important legal announcement would require impartial witnesses. Their presence would become invaluable before the evening ended. A second knock followed almost immediately. This time, it was Ibrahim Musa. The surveillance teams are in position. Any unusual activity? Nothing outside the expected. Ibrahim paused, but Amika received 3 phone calls within the last hour. From whom? We're still identifying the numbers. Obinna smiled faintly. They're nervous. So are we. The retired investigator looked directly at him. Are you certain you want to go through with this? Obinna answered without hesitation. Yes. There must be no more delays. If we postpone again, they'll disappear. Ibrahim nodded. Then tonight ends one way or another. As guests continued arriving, the atmosphere inside the mansion grew increasingly festive. Business executives greeted longtime friends. Community leaders exchanged stories. Employees proudly introduced their families to colleagues. Musicians performed traditional high-life melodies from a small stage overlooking the garden. Everything reflected the success Obinna had spent nearly 50 years creating. Adiz moved gracefully among the guests, thanking everyone for attending. She wore an elegant emerald green gown that had once been her late mother's favorite color. When Obinna saw her from across the hall, painful memories returned once again. She looked so much like Ifunanya. The same smile, the same gentle eyes. The resemblance made the betrayal even harder to accept. Moments later, Emeka approached him, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Father, you've been standing alone. I was enjoying the view." Emeka handed him one of the glasses. "You deserve today. You've earned every moment." Obinna accepted the drink politely. "Thank you." Instead of drinking immediately, he continued greeting newly arrived guests. After several minutes, he quietly exchanged the untouched glass with another one prepared earlier by Ibrahim's team. No one appeared to notice. The investigation had taught him never to assume that any drink placed directly into his hand was safe. Inside the ballroom, nearly 200 invited guests eventually took their seats. The company's senior executives occupied the front tables. Behind them sat employees who had remained with the business for decades. Representatives from charities, universities, hospitals, and local communities filled the remaining seats. Many of them believed they had come simply to celebrate a remarkable career. The master of ceremonies welcomed everyone warmly before inviting Obinna to deliver the opening remarks. Applause filled the room. Obinna slowly walked toward the podium. For a brief moment, he simply looked across the audience. So many familiar faces, people who had shared his journey, factory workers who had become supervisors, young graduates who now managed entire divisions, friends who had stood beside him during difficult years. His heart filled with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here." The applause faded. "When I left my village many years ago, I owned almost nothing." He smiled. "My entire future fit inside one small travel bag." Gentle laughter spread through the audience. "I never imagined that one day I would stand before so many extraordinary people." For the next 15 minutes, Obinna spoke about perseverance, about honesty, about responsibility. He thanked employees for their loyalty. He praised community leaders who had supported the company's growth. He honored the memory of his late wife, drawing emotional applause from the audience. Throughout the speech, Adizi smiled proudly. Emeka remained equally composed. Both appeared completely confident. Neither realized that the speech they expected had not yet begun. When Obinna finally concluded, the audience rose for a standing ovation. The master of ceremonies stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will now enjoy dinner before Chairman Umeh makes his special succession announcement later this evening." Exactly as planned. Guests moved toward the banquet hall. Conversation filled every corner of the mansion. Meanwhile, Ibrahim quietly observed Emeka. Almost immediately, he noticed something unusual. Instead of remaining with guests, Emeka excused himself and disappeared down a side corridor leading toward the private family wing. Ibrahim waited several seconds before following at a distance. The corridor was empty. At its end, Emeka entered Obinna's private sitting room and quietly closed the door. Ibrahim moved closer. The door remained slightly open. Inside, Emeka spoke into his phone. He changed the schedule. A brief pause. "No. The announcement hasn't happened yet." Another pause. "I understand." His voice became firmer. Then we move tonight. Ibrahim's expression hardened. There it was. Confirmation. The plan had not been abandoned, only adjusted. He quietly retreated before Amika emerged. Minutes later, Ibrahim located Obinna near the banquet hall. Without attracting attention, he handed him a folded note. Obinna opened it discreetly. Confirmed. They will act tonight. Obinna folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket without changing his expression. Around him, laughter continued. Guests admired the decorations. Children played in the garden. Musicians performed cheerful songs. No one noticed that the evening had just crossed an invisible line. The conspiracy was no longer waiting for another opportunity. It had committed itself. Before the night ended, someone intended to ensure that Obinna Umeh never delivered the speech everyone had traveled so far to hear. But unknown to the conspirators, every major witness they could possibly fear was already sitting inside the mansion. Every critical document had been secured. Every movement was quietly being watched. The stage had finally been set. Not for the retirement celebration Amika expected, but for the moment when years of deception, corruption, and betrayal would begin collapsing in front of the very people whose respect they had worked so hard to earn. Dinner unfolded beneath crystal chandeliers, accompanied by gentle music and the quiet hum of conversation. To every guest gathered inside the Umeh mansion, the evening seemed flawless. Laughter drifted across the ballroom as business leaders exchanged stories. Community elders congratulated Obinna Umeh on his remarkable career, and employees posed for photographs with the man who had changed so many lives. Only a handful of people knew that beneath the polished surface, every minute carried the possibility of tragedy. Obinna remained calm. Years of building a business empire had taught him that panic clouded judgment. No matter how dangerous the situation became clear, thinking always created opportunities. As guests enjoyed dessert, he quietly excused himself and stepped into the private library adjoining the ballroom. Within moments, Barrister Chinedu Nwosu and Ibrahim Musa joined him. The message confirmed they're moving tonight, Obinna said softly. Ibrahim nodded. My surveillance team has also confirmed unusual activity. What kind? The chief financial officer left the ballroom twice. Both times he met briefly with Amika near the eastern hallway. Chinedu frowned. They're coordinating. I believe so. Obinna looked toward the closed library door. Is everyone in position? Yes. Ibrahim unfolded a small diagram of the mansion. 2 investigators are monitoring every entrance. Independent auditors are already seated in the front rows. The trustees have copies of every restructuring document. And the police, Obinna asked. They're waiting nearby. Unmarked vehicles. They won't enter unless we signal them. Obinna slowly nodded. He had resisted involving law enforcement until the very last moment. He wanted every accusation supported by undeniable evidence. Tonight, that moment was finally approaching. There is one more thing, Ibrahim said. The laboratory completed the analysis of yesterday's lunch. Obinna looked directly at him. The vegetable stew. Yes. And it contained the same sedative compounds found in the tea and pepper soup. A heavy silence settled over the room. 3 separate meals. 3 separate attempts. The pattern was now impossible to dismiss. Chinedu carefully placed the latest laboratory report inside a thick evidence folder. Combined with the financial records, the shell companies, the forged approvals, and the recorded threats, he paused. We've reached a point where everything supports a single conspiracy. Obinna closed his eyes briefly. He had prayed until the very last moment that some explanation would emerge to spare his daughter from the truth. Instead, every new piece of evidence led in the opposite direction. The conspiracy had not weakened. It had become clearer. A discreet knock interrupted the meeting. One of Ibrahim's investigators entered quietly. "Sir." "What is it?" Ibrahim asked. "We've located another witness." "Who?" "The waiter who delivered drinks during Chairman Umeh's last private dinner." Obinna looked surprised. "I thought he had resigned." "He didn't resign. He disappeared." The investigator placed a signed statement on the table. "He came forward this afternoon. According to the statement, Amika had personally instructed him to leave one particular glass untouched because it had already been prepared." The waiter admitted that the request had seemed unusual. When he later learned about rumors surrounding the chairman's declining health, he became frightened and left his job without informing anyone. Now, after hearing that investigators were quietly asking questions, he had decided to tell the truth. "He doesn't know what was inside the glass," Ibrahim said, "but his testimony establishes direct interference." Chinedu smiled faintly. "The chain is almost complete." Obinna looked toward the ballroom. So many years, so much trust, and it all ends here. A few minutes later, the master of ceremonies approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I kindly invite everyone back to their seats." Guests gradually returned to the ballroom. Conversations softened. Cameras were raised. Everyone anticipated the retirement announcement. Amika sat beside Adizi in the front row. Both wore calm, confident expressions. Neither noticed Ibrahim's investigators quietly taking positions near the exits. Neither noticed two senior police officers entering discreetly through a side entrance, dressed in formal suits among the invited guests. Neither noticed the independent auditors placing sealed folders beneath their chairs. The trap had closed without a single dramatic movement. Obinna walked slowly toward the stage. Applause filled the hall once more. He waited patiently until complete silence returned. "My friends," he smiled warmly, "tonight was originally meant to be my farewell." Several guests nodded. "I intended to announce my retirement." He paused. "And to introduce the future leadership of this company." Amika straightened in his chair. Adiza smiled. This was the moment they had expected. Instead, Obinna continued. "However, over the past several weeks, I discovered that before anyone can inherit leadership, they must first deserve it." A faint ripple of confusion spread through the audience. Amika's smile faded almost imperceptibly. Obinna remained composed. "I have always believed that character matters more than wealth. Integrity matters more than power. And truth matters more than reputation." The room grew noticeably quieter. Some guests exchanged uncertain glances. Obinna reached beneath the podium and lifted a sealed leather folder. "For many years, I trusted that the people closest to me shared those values." He looked toward the front row. "Unfortunately, I was wrong." Adiz's eyes widened. Amika remained perfectly still. Only his tightly clenched jaw betrayed growing tension. Obinna continued calmly. "Before I make any announcement regarding succession, I must first address matters that threaten the future of everything this company represents." Across the ballroom, several executives shifted nervously. The chief financial officer lowered his eyes. Namdi Eza reached for a glass of water with visibly trembling fingers. Ibrahim noticed every reaction. So did the investigators quietly recording the proceedings. Obinna opened the evidence folder. Inside rested copies of financial records, laboratory reports, witness statements, and legal documents gathered over weeks of painstaking investigation. He did not reveal them immediately. Instead, he looked slowly across the audience one final time. "I have invited independent witnesses here tonight. Judges, auditors, trustees, community leaders. and friends who have walked beside me for decades. His voice remained steady, because what happens next deserves complete transparency. For the first time all evening, genuine fear appeared on Emeka's face. He understood. This was no retirement speech. This was something entirely different. Around the ballroom, guests leaned forward in silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The celebration had transformed into something no one could have imagined. Every carefully rehearsed plan Emeka had relied upon was beginning to unravel. The only thing left was the truth itself, and within moments, that truth would be placed before everyone, whose respect, admiration, and trust the conspirators believed they had already secured. Silence settled over the ballroom with a weight that seemed almost physical. More than 200 guests remained seated, their attention fixed entirely on Obinna Umeh. Only moments earlier, they had expected to witness the retirement of one of Nigeria's most respected businessmen. Instead, they now sensed they were about to witness something far more extraordinary. Obinna stood behind the podium without rushing. For nearly 50 years, he had built his reputation on patience and careful judgment. Tonight would be no different. He looked across the audience one final time before speaking. Many of you have known me for decades. Several heads nodded. You have trusted my decisions. You have supported this company. You have helped build an organization that has created opportunities for thousands of Nigerian families. His voice remained calm. I owe every one of you complete honesty. He reached into the leather folder and removed the first document. This is a certified financial report prepared by independent auditors. Large display screens, positioned on either side of the ballroom, immediately projected the document for everyone to see. Quiet murmurs spread among the guests. The report detailed millions of naira transferred through shell companies over many months. Every transaction carried authorization linked to Emeka Okafor, the company's chief financial officer, and procurement director Nnamdi Eze. Obinna allowed everyone enough time to examine the figures. Then he spoke again. At first, I believed these irregularities might simply be accounting errors. So I ordered a confidential review. Another document appeared on the screens. This one listed the shell companies, their non-existent offices, and the money routed through them. The independent auditors seated near the front quietly stood. Their lead representative addressed the audience. We personally verified these findings. The companies shown here performed little or no legitimate business. Large payments were approved without proper authorization. The murmuring grew louder. Several shareholders looked toward Emeka with visible confusion. Emeka slowly stood. Chairman, there must be some misunderstanding. His tone remained respectful. I've never hidden company transactions. Obinna looked directly at him. I know. You hid them very carefully. The words landed heavily across the room. Emeka forced a small laugh. If there are accounting concerns, we can discuss them privately. Obinna slowly shook his head. Not tonight. Tonight everything will be discussed publicly. He lifted another folder. This contains forensic analysis of digital signatures. The screens displayed side-by-side comparisons. Experts had highlighted subtle differences between Obinna's genuine authorizations and forged approvals used to release company funds. A certified handwriting specialist stepped forward from the audience. I examined every signature independently. My conclusion is included in the report. The chairman's authorization was repeatedly forged. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Several directors immediately began reviewing printed copies distributed by ushers moments earlier. Emeka's confident expression began to fade. He glanced briefly toward the chief financial officer. The man lowered his eyes. Obinna continued. Financial theft alone would have been painful. He paused. But, unfortunately, It did not end there. The ballroom fell completely silent again. Obinna removed 3 sealed laboratory reports. During recent weeks, I became unexpectedly ill. Several meals served inside my own home were quietly preserved for independent testing. The reports appeared on the large screens. Each confirmed abnormal concentrations of prescription sedatives. Tea, pepper soup, vegetable stew. 3 separate laboratory analyses. 3 separate occasions. A physician from the independent laboratory rose from his seat. We conducted these examinations without knowing the identity of the patient. The compounds found were consistent across all 3 samples. They should never have been present. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. Several guests instinctively turned toward Adizi. She looked completely stunned. Her hands trembled visibly. Emeka stepped forward. This proves nothing. Someone could have contaminated those meals afterward. Obinna nodded calmly. A reasonable question. He turned another page, which is why additional evidence was collected. Mama Ngozi slowly walked toward the stage. Many guests recognized the elderly housekeeper immediately. She had served the Umeh family for nearly 3 decades. Obinna smiled gently. Mama Ngozi. She nodded respectfully before facing the audience. In a trembling but steady voice, she described Emeka's repeated late-night visits to the kitchen. She explained how he insisted on sending staff away. She described the sudden change in Obinna's herbal tea. She admitted her growing fears. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. I prayed I was wrong. I wanted to believe I was imagining everything. The audience remained completely silent. Obinna thanked her warmly before inviting another witness. The former waiter entered next. He repeated his earlier statement. Emeka had personally instructed him not to touch one particular glass because it had already been prepared. He admitted he had found the request strange, but had obeyed without asking questions. When rumors later spread about the chairman's declining health fear drove him to resign, Emeka shook his head repeatedly. These people are lying. They're being manipulated. Before anyone could respond, Ibrahim Musa calmly walked onto the stage. The retired investigator carried a small digital recorder. I'd like everyone to hear something. He pressed the play button. The distorted recording filled the ballroom. Forget the documents. The old man won't be around much longer anyway. The recording ended. Silence followed. Ibrahim addressed the audience. This recording was provided voluntarily by an accountant who began receiving anonymous threats after uncovering suspicious financial records. Emeka's breathing became noticeably heavier. His carefully controlled confidence had vanished. Still, he made one final attempt. You have no proof that voice belongs to anyone here. Ibrahim nodded. Yeah, that's correct. Which is why we continued investigating. He signaled toward the rear of the ballroom. 2 investigators escorted forward the chief financial officer. The man's face had turned pale. He looked toward Emeka only once before lowering his head. Obinna spoke quietly. Earlier this afternoon, he agreed to cooperate. A wave of astonishment swept across the room. The executive closed his eyes. I signed a formal statement. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I participated in the financial fraud. I approved false payments. I followed instructions. Every word echoed through the silent hall. He swallowed hard before continuing. Emeka promised all of us ownership after Chairman Umeh died. Several guests covered their mouths in shock. The executive's shoulders slumped. I never wanted anyone killed. I believed. His voice cracked. I believed the chairman would simply retire. He looked toward Obinna. When I realized what was really happening, he began crying. It was already too late. The confession shattered the final illusion. Emeka slowly backed away. His eyes searched desperately across the ballroom. No allies remained. Every person who had once supported him now avoided his gaze. Adize looked at him in disbelief. Her lips trembled. "You told me." She struggled to speak. "You said—" Emeka said nothing. For the first time since this nightmare began, his silence revealed more than any explanation ever could. At that exact moment, two senior police officers stepped forward from among the guests. One calmly addressed the room. "Based on the evidence presented and additional statements already obtained, formal arrests will now be made." The ballroom remained frozen. The carefully constructed empire of deception had collapsed completely. Not through anger, not through revenge, but through patience, truth and undeniable evidence, gathered one careful step at a time. For several long seconds after the police officers stepped forward, no one inside the ballroom moved. The silence was unlike anything Obinna Umeh had ever experienced. Hundreds of people were present, yet the room felt almost empty. Every guest stared toward the front, struggling to understand how an evening planned as a retirement celebration had become the public collapse of a carefully hidden conspiracy. One of the officers unfolded an official document. "Mr. Emeka Okafor, you are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, criminal conspiracy forgery, witness intimidation, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used as evidence in court." The words echoed through the hall. Emeka looked around desperately. His confidence had vanished. Only hours earlier, he had believed he was about to inherit one of the largest privately owned companies in Nigeria. Now, every exit was blocked. Every witness stood against him. Every lie had been exposed. "This is a mistake," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I've done nothing wrong." The lead officer remained calm. "You'll have every opportunity to defend yourself in court." As another officer stepped forward with handcuffs, Emeka instinctively turned toward Adize. "Adize!" She did not answer. She simply stared at him with tears filling her eyes. For weeks she had believed every promise he made. He had convinced her that her father planned to leave most of his fortune to outsiders. He claimed that the charitable foundation would destroy the family's future. He insisted that they merely needed to secure what rightfully belonged to them. Never once had he admitted the extent of the fraud. Never once had he confessed that innocent people had been threatened. Never once had he revealed how far he was willing to go. Now, standing before hundreds of witnesses, every deception unraveled. The police escorted the chief financial officer and Nnamdi Eze forward as well. Neither resisted. Both had already signed detailed statements admitting their roles in the financial scheme. As they passed the front row, several long-time employees lowered their heads in disappointment. Many of them had worked beside those men for years. The betrayal extended far beyond Obinna. It had wounded the entire company. Adize slowly stood. Her legs seemed unsteady. She looked first at Emeka, then at her father. "Dad!" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Obinna remained where he was. He had imagined this moment many times. He expected to feel anger. He expected satisfaction. Instead, all he felt was sorrow. Adize took several hesitant steps toward him. "I didn't know." Tears streamed down her face. "I swear to you, I didn't know everything." The ballroom remained silent. No one interrupted. No one looked away. "I knew about the inheritance," she continued. "I argued with him. I believed you were being unfair." She struggled to breathe. "He kept telling me that if the company left the family, everything you built would disappear." She covered her face with trembling hands. "I believed him." Obinna listened quietly. He did not speak until she finished. "Did you know someone was putting drugs into my food?" Adize froze. Her expression changed instantly. "What?" "I asked you a question." She stared at him in disbelief. "No." "I thought—" Her voice cracked. "I thought he only wanted to convince you to retire." She slowly turned toward Emeka. "You said no one would get hurt." Emeka lowered his eyes. For the first time since his arrest, he had no answer. Adese's knees gave way. She collapsed onto the polished floor, overcome with grief. Everything she had believed was gone. The future she imagined no longer existed. The man she trusted had used her love for him as a weapon against her own father. Obinna walked down from the stage. The audience watched silently as he stopped in front of his daughter. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her. Instead, he gently helped her to her feet. "You made terrible choices," he said softly. "And those choices have consequences." She sobbed uncontrollably. "I know. I don't deserve your forgiveness." Obinna looked into her eyes. "Forgiveness and accountability are not the same. You must face the truth. You must accept responsibility for every decision you made." He paused. "But you will always remain my daughter." Those words caused many guests to wipe tears from their eyes. Even the police officers stood quietly, allowing father and daughter a final moment before continuing their duties. Adese threw her arms around Obinna. "I'm so sorry." He closed his eyes briefly. "So am I." When she finally stepped back, she nodded toward the officers. "I'll cooperate. I'll tell them everything I know." The lead investigator acknowledged her decision. "Your cooperation will be included in the official record." As the arrests concluded, Obinna returned to the podium one final time. The ballroom remained completely silent. "My friends," he began, "this company was never built to make one family wealthy. It was built to create opportunities. It belongs to every honest worker who sacrificed to make it successful." He looked toward the employees seated throughout the hall. "Because of that, the restructuring documents I signed this week will take effect immediately." Barrister Chinedu stepped forward and formally announced the new governance structure. An independent board would oversee major decisions. The Employee Ownership Trust would gradually receive a significant share of company profits. The charitable foundation would immediately begin funding scholarships, hospitals, vocational training centers, and support programs for widows and orphan children across Nigeria. The announcement was met with quiet applause that steadily grew louder. Many employees could hardly believe what they were hearing. Obinna had chosen to protect the future of thousands rather than concentrate everything in a single inheritance. Several months later, the criminal trial concluded. Financial records, forensic reports, witness testimony, laboratory analyses, and digital evidence confirmed the conspiracy beyond reasonable doubt. Emeka received a lengthy prison sentence for fraud, conspiracy, forgery, witness intimidation, and attempted murder. The executives who participated in the financial crimes were also convicted according to their individual roles. Because Adese cooperated fully with investigators, returned every unlawful financial benefit, and admitted her actions before the court, her sentence reflected both accountability and cooperation. She accepted the judgment without complaint. Obinna visited her only after the trial ended. Their conversations were quiet, painful, honest. Healing came slowly. Trust was not restored overnight. Yet neither father nor daughter allowed hatred to become the final chapter of their story. Years later, whenever people spoke about Obinna Umeh's greatest achievement, they rarely mentioned the billions he had earned. Instead, they remembered the courage of a man who chose truth over reputation, justice over revenge, and compassion, without abandoning accountability. His company continued to grow. His foundation transformed countless lives, and the legacy he left behind was measured not by the wealth he accumulated, but by the integrity he refused to surrender even when the greatest betrayal came from within his own family. Every life presents moments when we are forced to choose between comfort and truth. Obinna's story reminds us that the deepest wounds are often not inflicted by strangers, but by the people we trust the most. Betrayal hurts because it grows where love once lived. Yet even in the darkest moments, our character is not measured by what others do to us, but by how we respond. Obinna could have chosen revenge, public humiliation, or hatred. Instead, he chose patience, wisdom, and justice. He gathered the truth carefully, allowed the law to take its course, and refused to let anger destroy the values that had guided him all his life. This story also teaches us that wealth, power, and success are never the true measure of a person. A fortune built over decades can disappear, but integrity remains long after money is gone. Greed promises happiness, yet it often blinds people to the blessings they already have. Emeka wanted everything and ended up with nothing. Adize allowed ambition to cloud her judgment and nearly lost the one relationship that mattered most. Their choices remind us that every small compromise with our conscience can lead us further away from the people we love and the person we once hoped to become. At the same time, forgiveness should never be confused with the absence of accountability. Loving someone does not mean ignoring their wrongdoing. Real love sometimes requires us to stand for what is right, even when doing so breaks our own hearts. Justice protects not only the victim, but also countless innocent people whose lives might otherwise be harmed. By choosing truth over silence, Obinna preserved the future of his employees, protected his legacy, and gave his daughter the opportunity to face the consequences of her actions and begin the long journey toward redemption. May this story encourage you to guard your integrity, value the people who truly love you, and remember that trust is earned through actions, not words. No matter how difficult life becomes, never allow bitterness to define your future. Let wisdom guide your decisions. Let compassion remain in your heart, and let honesty become the legacy you leave behind. If this story touched your heart or taught you something meaningful, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what lessons stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy inspiring stories about justice, family hope, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.